Hello to all you crazy cognoids all over the world. I am PMsquare partner and head of data account Ryan Dolley. And today we are going to be going over what is new in 11.2.2. It feels so good to say because it rhymes. I am going to be joined by a special guest here, Craig Colangelo, who's going to be coming on in just a second to help talk us through what's new in this release. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some of you out there. There's a massive echo, I'm being told. Can someone confirm that? Can someone confirm that other than Martin? Massive echo? Okay. Craig is not hearing it. Martin, check your speakers. Anybody else? No echo. All right, we're going to move on. Always that's the thing about doing it live. You always got those moments of panic. Where was I? I'm going to be joined by Craig Colangelo, a senior solution architect who is going to help us walk through what's new in this release. So he's going to be coming on in just a minute and we'll get started. But first, let me say hello to all you crazy cognoids all over the world. So we got people from Wisconsin. We've got someone from Ukraine. Good to have you here today. Hope you are well, certainly. Poland. Where else do we have people? For Chicago, I am in Detroit. We've got Waukesha, Green Bay, Germany. Martin from Germany, always good to see you here. South Africa. One of my favorite things about this is getting to see people from all over the world virtually. Hopefully someday in person again. But good to have you all here. Okay, so 11.2.2 came out last Friday, and we're going to go through it. But first, let me just talk you through a couple announcements we have to make here. So these are everything I'm going to be talking about. You can follow really on the PMsquare events page, pmsquare.com/events. And some things that we have coming up that we want you to be aware of. The first one is coming up. We have this webinar, Infinite Testing for Cognos and Beyond, on April 13th. So what is this about? What this is about is our good friend Ralph Rober has a tool called Cometa that is awesome. It is an incredible job testing content in Cognos and in other applications, but it has a very tight integration with Cognos, and it does it in a very different way, right? So it's instead of going in and triggering things via the SDK, what it's doing is it's actually logging into Cognos through virtual browser sessions and running your content there. So it can pull some very interesting statistics and do some very interesting comparisons between versions. You're not going to want to miss it. You will want to meet Ralph. You're not going to want to miss this session. He is a cool dude, and this is a cool tool. So be there for it. Also, keep checking this page because we have a lot of training going on this year. So public virtual training classes, we have a few of them announced already. So planning analytics coming up on April 19th, and on May 19th, an introduction to Cognos report authoring. So that is also something you're going to want to pay attention to. Those classes are great. I will tell you, when I personally learned Cognos, I learned it from our trainer at PMsquare. So if you want to learn from the best, I know I did, and you will too, make sure you attend these courses. The other thing to talk about is, of course, the Cogbox powered by Cognos Paul's giant brain. And so if you haven't checked out the Cogbox yet, go to pmsquare.com/Cogbox, download it. It is a bunch of free to use utilities. There's a free version and a paid version, of course. But the free version has stuff that is going to blow your mind. So check it out, pmsquare.com/Cogbox. The people who use this love it. We get such great feedback on it. And it is for you. If you're the type of person who shows up to a live stream like this and gets excited, you're the type of person who wants Cogbox. So go and check it out. The last thing I'm going to say before we bring Craig on here is you may have noticed, if you've been here before, we have switched the chat to subscriber-only mode. So if you are not subscribed to the PMsquare YouTube channel and you would like to participate in today's conversation, go ahead and click the subscribe button now. It's also going to do us a big favor if you give this a thumbs up. Click like right now, and then to help us spread the word about what we're doing here on PMsquare. Slava, I see you say this is an awesome tool for developers. It is really amazing. it really kind of, like, we all know Paul, right? If you don't, cognospaul.com, but like we all know Paul. It really takes Paul's wizardry and distills it into something that you can tap into in your Cognos environment. So I highly encourage you to check it out. Okay. Now, with that said, and without further ado, I am going to welcome to this stage here, Mr. Craig Colangelo. Craig, can you hear me?
Hey, Rod guy. I'm good. How are you? You doing well?
I am doing well. Yeah, things are good over here. It is dispiritingly cold still in Michigan. I'll tell you that.
Hey, well, we just got half a foot of snow, but it's sunny and like 60. So
that's what Colorado's like.
Yeah, a little of this, little of that. Keeps it interesting.
Yeah. So Craig, as I mentioned, is a senior solutions architect with PMsquare. Craig, why don't you go ahead and give the people a little introduction to who you are and what you're all about?
Sure. Let's see. Well, I mean, as far as like IBM and Cognos and data warehousing goes, I started off in this space kind of on a computer science track and, learned all the classic like reporting languages, Fortran and COBOL and RPG and all those things. And it kind of got me interested in the presentation layer of what we used to call decision support way back when, right? So started off kind of down that road, spent a little time as like a reporting analyst and on kind of left like the normal employment world back when I was a BI manager, so at a few different places, and moved into consulting and have been working with Cognos, since impromptu days. So yeah, for 20 some years now. And yeah, now I'm a senior solution architect with PMsquare and have been for the past 5 years.
Great. Yeah. And those of you, if you're one of our clients, certainly you may have had Craig on one of your projects. I know I've worked with him many times over the years, and he's just an awesome Cognos consultant. So it's good to have you here today to share in this unboxing.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. That's a good way to call it, an unboxing. Yeah.
It's like a little gift IBM gives us occasionally, and we get to come together and see what's inside the box. So, let me go ahead and share my screen here, and let's get started walking through this. So what I'm going to say about this release is it is full of what I would call tasty morsels, right? Is how I'm going to term it. So it's not, as far as features, like new features are concerned, there's a lot of really helpful stuff that we're going to walk through. I would say that from what we know internally, 11.2.3 is going to contain some kind of stuff with a little more oomph, but there's a lot of stuff in here to make your life easier as a developer, particularly in dashboards and data modules. And so we are going to walk through that stuff now. But before we get into it, actually, I think we have an important public service announcement, and that is we want to talk about the log4j issue and some of our experience with that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to go ahead and share Craig's screen. And Craig, why don't you kind of walk us through, maybe give us a little background on log4j for anyone who's unaware, although I think we probably all might be aware, but just give us a little background and then walk us through your experience with it.
Yeah, sounds good, Ryan. So, time is blurring for me, so I don't remember exactly when log4j popped up. I think it was around the holidays, maybe between Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe. Regardless, it was, an exploit, a situation where lots of people in the IT world had to do lots of scrambling to mitigate some of the risk of an exploit that was found with the Apache's log4j. Obviously on the IBM side of things, they release interim fixes and even no upgrade fixes along the way in order to help kind of mitigate the risk, right? So I encountered an interesting situation this morning with our demo server. And we upgraded this sucker probably a couple of days ago, and then like a total noob, I didn't do proper testing and I didn't find this issue until like an hour ago. Okay. So that's the honest truth. Okay. So let me help. Hopefully this will help other people that, might wind up in the same situation, because obviously there's no chatter on this yet, right? This is kind of where you're hearing the first chatter about this probably. So let me walk you through the scenario, right? So we have this Cognos demo server, and it's been around for a little while. And it used to be on 11.2.1 most recently. And originally we went through and we did the no upgrade fix. So this is probably back in like early December. So the no upgrade fix was basically an agent, a jar file that you put on and you change some configuration settings basically to utilize this new jar pointer that kind of helped mitigate some of these log4j issues. Well, after that, we actually went through and we did an actual upgrade. So to interim fix 2, which wasn't the latest at 11.1.7, interim fix 3, I think was. But so we were at an actual upgrade fix, 11.1.7 interim fix 2. But again, we already had that no upgrade fix in place, right? So basically, when I went to go start up my server this morning, I saw that the query service wasn't working. Right. And that was the only thing that wasn't working. So again, noob that I am, I didn't actually test and find out. I mean, the query service is pretty core to a lot of stuff, right? You would think that I would have found that before this morning, but I didn't. So basically I had to react quickly, right? And I saw that it was looking at the log files. I saw that Cognos was looking for a missing jar file, and that missing jar file was related to that log4j non-upgrade fix. So in particular, this log4j safe agent 2021.jar. Okay. So in order to rectify this problem, which I haven't fully diagnosed yet or figured out other ways around it, though there probably are, and we can talk about that a little bit. What I did to rectify this problem was I just downloaded that jar file again, that log4j safe agent 2021, and I threw it back in my lib file or in my lib directory. So under your install directory, web apps, p2pd, webinf lib, right? So I threw that jar file back in there, and then I saw that it solved the problem, right? It was able to find the jar and it's able to function just fine. So after that, the problem was solved. We were able to do our live stream this morning, right? But I'm still curious as to why this was an issue, right? So what I found was, in your Bootstrap WLP Win64 XML file, we actually, it's a new file. So this used to be a reference to that old jar file, but this actually changed because, of course, on the upgrade, this thing was upgraded as well, right? So there's no more reference. So I was like, okay, what else could be the issue? Well, I think I found the issue, and I think the issue is in the XQE config custom file that you modified when you did that no upgrade fix for log4j. And you can see that there's an actual reference here to that jar file that still lives on. So as to whether or not you still actually need to utilize this custom config, that kind of depends on your own circumstance and what other sort of customization you've done. But I think it's probably safe to say that we can roll that back. Or you can do what I did for the quick fix and just throw that jar file back out there. But again, you wouldn't want to have to let that live on in perpetuity, right? So there might be a better way around this. Anyhow, all that to say, Ryan, with 11.2.2, one of the core things that they did was they mitigated all these log4j issues, and we can kind of see. Let's see. I did a quick search this morning, and we see that the log4j references are all updated to 2.17.1, which is almost the latest. I believe 2.17.2 is the latest, but all the fixes that are related to the log4j exploit are included in this 2.17.1. So that was one of the major upgrades with this 11.2.2 fix or dot release. So hopefully that little dissertation there kind of helps somebody else avoid this same issue, because I know it caught me by surprise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's you've done the public quite a service here by talking through this and really by uncovering it. And I will tell everybody there really was a moment of panic this morning when it was like, oh, the demo environment's not working. But Craig heroically sorted it out. And I see Sean in the chat saying that they also did the no upgrade fix and ran into the issue when they upgraded to 11.2.1 IF3. So,
right.
It could, I'd be curious to see on the 11.1.7, long-term release, if there's a similar problem. I wouldn't be shocked if there was. So be on the lookout for it. And I'm glad you were here to find it, because I would have been, frankly, totally lost in diagnosing that one. So thank you, Craig.
Well, of course, it wasn't me. It was me. It was mostly Sonia that did it. But shout out to Sonia.
Yeah. Well, she's at the end of lots of chains of what is going on in Cognos. Wind up with Sonia. She's great. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's actually in this release. So the first thing I want to show you, like I said, it's a lot of tasty morsels. So morsel number one is going to be that in the list view. So when you're looking at your content, you're in the list view, and you go into default row size. So, in the list view, there's multiple row sizes available. But in the default row size, which gives you the most space, they now include the description of your content in the list view. So before that wasn't viewable, and now it is. And I think this is, if you're not in the habit of giving things meaningful descriptions, you might want to do that, right? And come up with some idea of in your organization what a meaningful description is, because you now have the ability to make it easily viewable when someone's in here. And I think this is one of the default views that people will use. I find I like the list view better. I think most people kind of like the list view better than the tiles. And so it's just a little thing, but it's something to think about. Likewise, and I would say this advice goes for everywhere. Like when you provide a tooltip and a description in data modules, people can actually see that stuff. And so putting a meaningful description in is important. And now it's visible here in the kind of folder UI. And so that's the first thing that I would take a look at, is just, if you don't have meaningful descriptions, now you can surface them. So think about how you might put those in. Not a huge change.
It's just more metadata, right? If you make your assets more discoverable that way, do it.
Exactly. Now let's take a look here at the. What do I want to look at here? Where is that dashboard? This one. So this is my favorite dashboard that I've personally made anyway, because I think it looks nice. And so the changes here. So the first change, and this is actually enormously helpful, is that you can now multi-select. So you notice when I click and drag, I now kind of have this lasso, I guess, for lack of a better term. But when I release this, it's going to eventually, come on now, Cognos. There we go, right? It multi-selects objects. So before you had to control click to multi-select objects. Now you can kind of click and drag to multi-select objects. And then, of course, when you're in edit mode, and you multi-select objects, you can then look at the properties that those objects share and edit them all at once. So this is, I think, a more natural action, and probably the action that people are most likely to choose to use. But it also kind of flows through into a second change, which has to do with the distribution of objects on the screen. So let me go ahead, and I've got this little chart, and let me just copy paste this guy a couple times just to show you what I'm talking about. So you notice the spacing between them is way off. And what you can do now is, if I just multi-select all three of them, and then you go into the alignment menu, you're going to see you now have two new options: distribute horizontally and distribute vertically. So if I choose distribute horizontally, you'll see what it will do is it will distribute them equidistant from one another. And this is really helpful, because getting things to be the exact same distance from one another can really be quite a pain sometimes in here, when you want to line things up to be exact. Like in this case, you'll notice the size different distances between these boxes is really not exactly the same. And that's because what I was doing to line them up was I was selecting them, and then I was using the arrow keys. And, if you use the arrow key, it will step you over like a pixel at a time. So it's just eyeballing it and trying to get them lined up equidistant from one another. Whereas now you can just kind of get them into the same plane and then select them all and choose distribute horizontally, and it will automatically make them the same distance from one another. And then you have the same thing for vertical alignment. So you can choose to distribute vertically, equidistant from one another. And that is really an enormous time saver. If what you're trying to do is align objects and get them the same distance from one another, it was really quite a pain before. And this just makes it much, much easier. Now, another thing that is new in this release, and let's go ahead and just look at one of these and expand this to fill the whole screen. So if you look at the notes, actually, well, what it will tell you is that if you control click up here, that it gives you this. It's interesting. Did it actually work that time? No, see, that's just the normal behavior. It's not quite doing what I expect. What it says is that if you control click, you now get access to this whole new styling menu. And Craig and I both tried this and we couldn't quite get what it was talking about. But what I did notice is that you have direct access to the styling menu for a lot of objects on here simply by right clicking and choosing style text. And I don't think that in the past you had that. You actually had to go to the right point in the properties in order to style any of these objects. But now you can right click and choose style text, and it will bring up this text styling pop-up to allow you to do things like change the font size and the color of that particular piece of text, which in the past, like I said, you really had to know where to look in the properties in order to find that. Now, does that fit with your memory, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just showed what it is that they were trying to roll out. I couldn't find it this morning, but I'm glad that you just found it.
So if you go to the release notes, the release notes are going to tell you to like control click at places on the screen. And I just had no success with that. What I did have success with was right click and then style text. So I'm not certain what the disconnect is between my experience and what you see in the release notes, but that's one thing to be on the lookout for is at least in our instance, it's a right click action. It's not a control click action in order to be able to style text like that.
Yeah, good to know, Ryan. We even tried a few different browsers and a few different, maximized, minimized, edit, just all these different variables and couldn't quite get to that. So I'm glad that you found that the right click got us there.
Yeah, it was just, I guess I just kind of got lucky because that's what it takes. Yeah, I know. Another thing that is new. Yeah. So Mike helpfully points out and agrees, right? You didn't previously have that level of control over formatting different text elements on the visuals, as far as he remembers. And that gels with my memory too. It's like you didn't have that level of control, and everything you did have control through was, of course, through the properties window, which is fine for us, but it's a little more intuitive to be able to actually interact with the visualization directly, rather than have to know where in the properties window am I going to find this stuff. So thank you, Mike, for confirming that your memory is the same as ours. Now, there are additionally some changes to widgets. And this might seem small to you at first, but I'm going to make an argument that this is actually really, really good. And that is that if I insert a text widget and you look at the properties of the text widget, you now have a lot more control here over things like indentations and the margin. And why this is big is, let me just put some text in here. Okay. Before, when you didn't have control of the margin, like let's imagine that what I want to do here is I want to show I want to have a title on a chart or a title over an object. It doesn't really matter what it is, right? The padding on these text boxes is huge. And so one thing that I would often do is I would take 3 charts and I will line them up. In fact, do I have an example? I don't have a good example of this in this environment right now, but I would take 3 charts and I would line them up. And this is going to look a little ugly, so you're going to have to bear with it, right? But let's say these charts are thematically related to one another. Well, then maybe what I want to do is I want to put a box over top of them, right, to kind of give them a header. But the problem is that there's like a minimum box size, right? And there's a minimum text size. Like this text box cannot be smaller than a certain amount. This box can't be smaller than a certain amount. And this text couldn't be smaller than a certain amount. So it created a lot of wasted space. And instead, what you can do is you can actually change the inner margins in order to be smaller, so that the text takes up more of the available space, and it can give you a much more elegant look, because like a lot of wasted space is just not. It makes things look big and blocky, and it's not sleek, right? And so this type of change, the ability to change these margins for these widget icons, I think is particularly useful for text. Now, of course, my request to IBM would be, just give me that exact same feature, but give it to me on everything, right? Let me change the padding pixels on any object within Cognos in dashboards instead of just the text.
Ryan, what you're describing is reporting.
Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, fundamentally, there is and I think you bring up an interesting point, Craig, which is, I think IBM is they do have an interesting question to solve, right? Or problem to solve. And that is just what belongs where, right? What level of control is appropriate for dashboards? Mm-hmm. And at what point do you draw the line where you say, this is really more of a reporting concern or a reporting feature? And watching them over the years try to make sure that both tools are purpose fit has been very interesting. And I do think that there's space for more control in dashboards, but obviously you get to a point where you've really just reproduced reporting in a different UI, right? If you take this all the way. And so I'm kind of curious, Craig, maybe if you have thoughts about that, or what that experience is, and maybe if you have advice for people on when to use one versus the other.
Yeah, I mean, the conventional wisdom is, if you need precise control, kind of like what you described, then you're probably going to need the report authoring interface, right? But yeah, it's an interesting problem. I mean, certainly there are different personas that utilize, each of the tools, to some degree. But then, of course, everybody on this call, for example, we all want total control, whether it's WYSIWYG dashboarding or whatever, right? So it's an interesting problem that IBM has, and I don't know that there's a single right solution.
Yeah, that's my feeling too. And definitely the message I get from people is, I wish I had more control in dashboards, right? But of course, it's like the Spider-Man thing: with great power comes great responsibility. And so the more control you put in here, of course, you run the risk of making it less friendly for someone who really just needs a drag and drop visualization interface and doesn't care as much about padding pixels. So that go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's some, not to give too much away, but I think there's some dashboard theming coming down the pike at some point. And, maybe that'll kind of help solve some of these problems, right? If you've got, from the jump sort of dashboard theming that, even the, simple business user dashboard utilizer, persona uses, and it's a great jump off point, and it's got almost everything that you need, right? Maybe you do require less precision. So maybe with the introduction of, whatever sort of better theming comes our way, it'll kind of help to address some of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool to hear that's on its way. So the next thing I would point out is there's been a slight change. So if you look at the dashboard properties as a whole, there is now the ability to set a different background color for each tab, right? So I could go to the default chart and, I don't do this, but I could change this to red, right? But then this is still white. And so that is a piece of functionality that you didn't have until this release. Every tab had to have the same background color. And now they do not. And so that,
whether you need it or not. Yeah.
Whether you need it or not. Yeah. I would imagine there were people asking for this, and I guess my recommendation would be, light gray is great. Roll with light gray or white, or dark mode. But, now you have this flexibility, which is I see Mike helpfully piping in with the hot takes on don't use this feature. Certainly don't use it in the way I described. This is for professionals only, and professionals don't do that. So I wouldn't. Definitely not a bright red. It does remind me of the days like the late 2000s days when like everything you saw from Cognos and all the other vendors was like just so garish and, crazy colored backgrounds and all that sort of stuff. And it was just like, it was a can you versus should you conversation back then.
Yeah, to make it pop or not pop.
Yes. Background color to red and all pie charts. Exactly. The other thing to point out here, and this is actually kind of welcome in my mind, is the pins. So, you've got your pin capability. And this sidebar used to take forever to load, and now it doesn't. So I actually think it was a barrier to usage of the pins function a little bit because it took so long for the sidebar to load. But now you'll see when I open it, it just kind of loads very quickly. I think they've changed this to just use screenshots. I think before they were maybe actually loading in the chart. And so if you had 16 of these, it was loading 16 charts, whereas now it's just a screen capture of what the chart looks like. I am curious in the chat, do you use the pins feature? I find this to be helpful to me sometimes when I'm trying to port content from one place to the other, is to just pin it and then use it in other locations. But I'm curious, if you do use it, let me know. I think there's a potentially powerful feature in here if you would just give us the ability to share pins. So then I could make a pin library and say, this is the pin library of visualizations for finance people. And then teach them, when you're in dashboards, if you want to see, this is almost like Cognos Workspace, if you think back to Cognos 10, right? Like, here's our library of useful visualizations that we pinned for you. That would be the next step that I'd like to see happen here. And then I think it would become something really useful for kind of community building and community content sharing in the organization.
Yeah, good point, Ryan.
All right, so that's what's new in dashboards. Now, there is a change in the assistant that I wanted to show you, and this is a welcome one, and it's the assistant now understands revenue for last week. What is this going to return? Well, it's not going to return anything because our data set, right, it's the sample, so they don't have data for last week. But the important thing to show here is look at the filter, right? Date between, and it applied a kind of relative time filter based on the fact that I typed in last week. So the assistant now understands kind of normal English relative time, where you don't have to have kind of custom fields. Like, to do this before this release, you would have had to have a week field, and someone would have had to type in something that says like, week equals, and then would have to know that last week is I don't know what it was. Let's say it's the 17th week of the year. Week equals 17, right? But now you can just say last week, last month, last year, this week, that sort of thing. And it will automatically build a filter based on that relative time understanding that it now has. So I think, it's able to do this now with, if you look at the things it can do here, it can do on-the-fly aggregation. So you can take a field that is a sum and you can average it in here. You can do these relative time things. It can understand location. So you could say, revenue is a sum, but you could say, show me average revenue for California last week.
Last Christmas. You could even do things like holidays. Even try it, Ryan. Throw revenue for last Christmas and let's see what it does. But temporal expressions, right? So it literally is like even holidays, right? So not just relative time in the context of previous periods, but also even particular holidays, for example.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And so that, I think, is incremental steps towards this assistant becoming more and more powerful. I feel like every release, there's something that takes it one step further, right? And so, if you think about what a user could do now, they could say, show me average revenue for California for Christmas, for last Christmas, and then it'll generate a visualization for them, and then they can say build dashboard. It'll build a dashboard for them, right? That it's come so far from this the early releases that we had here, that it's really quite promising. So if you haven't checked it out lately, I would go ahead and do that and just look at the documentation, see what all you can do here now. You might be surprised. Hello, Caesar. Good to see you here. Okay. The next thing I wanted to show is related to data modules. So you all know, if you've watched any of these, you know that data modules are close to my heart. This is my favorite thing in the 11 release stream. I think it's become enormously useful. Obviously, there are still situations where you want to use Framework Manager, but certainly it has reached a point where for most new development, I would start here and then look at Framework Manager. You know, when it hits a level of complexity, when you are talking about thousands of tables, data modules don't handle that as well. Or if there's certain features you need, like object level security, that aren't in data modules yet. Otherwise, I always start here. And so what's new in data modules? So first of all, there's a refresh properties. So if I look at a table now, you see you have the refresh properties button. And what that does is it actually goes back to the database and it looks at the properties of a field, and it will automatically pull in things like data type, right? The data type, the technical data type, the usage, and the aggregation. So like if you update a field from a, I don't know, an int to something else, and you want to capture that, before you would have to go in and edit every field. Now you can just update the whole table. So if you make kind of a bulk change, you can now do a bulk update to capture to capture new properties. The other thing you can now do in here is there's data tree sorting. So you can see in the past, you had to manually sort each one of these, or you had to download the Cogbox, because the Cogbox gave the ability to do sorting in here. One thing about the Cogbox is it's like a race. We're always staying one step ahead of IBM, right? And so we're plugging gaps, and a lot of times IBM eventually fills them. And that is thrilling to us. We would rather have a better product, a better base Cognos product, than force you to use the Cogbox. But the Cogbox fills a lot of gaps. This is one of those gaps that has now been closed. So you now have the sort. We can sort by label or type, ascending or descending. So if I choose type descending, you'll see that it's now sorting by type rather than the label. And so
and that's cool, right? That's a cool improvement. It's not quite I'm pretty sure that our friend Cogbox Paul did a whole lot better in Cogbox, right? And I believe that there's even better ways to sort, right? But you can see what IBM's doing here, right? They're trying to help on the data modeling side of things, right? So, we're all whizzes at Framework Manager, and we can move things around nice and easily and create aliases and, sort however we want and hide and show, and just all in a heartbeat, right? So I'm glad to see that they are taking these incremental steps to kind of make the data modeling more heavy duty data modeling portion of this, data modeling UI, be more up to snuff, right? And that's kind of what this incremental step does.
Exactly. And it's a lot of good little things like that that are in this release. And another one I would point out, so this is not in the release, but there's like almost a secret data modules beta that you only know about if you read this blog post. And that is this. So this is, you recall the alias and the shortcut from Framework Manager, and the fact that they don't exist in data modules has been a pain point for people forever. And you could kind of fake it. Once views, like custom tables and table views came in, you could really kind of give some of the same, something that felt the same to end users, but wasn't exactly the same. And now you have in beta the shortcut and alias functionality. So if you're interested in trying this out, you got to talk to Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor is the data module product manager. He is a cool dude. And I like Zach very much. I think data modules are in good hands with him. He cares about the product. And so I'm happy to recommend that if you want to try this out, you contact Zach, ztaylor@us.ibm.com, to give it a shot. This is very, very good that they're adding this in. I'm very happy. I think you will all be very happy too. And so get into that beta if you're interested in it. And Zach is how you do it. I wish I'd known about this earlier, because I would have emailed Zach and we would have shown it on the live stream today, but we didn't have time to do that. So check that out. The last thing I want to show you in data modules is actually not necessarily in data modules. It is in the kind of a very important feature that impacts data modules, and that is this. Let me get out of here. So data modules have a really awesome relative time feature where you can super easily build relative time categories based on the calendars that ship with the Cognos samples, or of course you can build your own calendar using the calendar builder report that they also ship. And that gives you, current year, previous year, year to date, month to date, last year, month to date, 2 years ago, month to date, all that stuff automatically gens it for you. It's great. Okay. So here's the problem with that feature. Is it always based its definition of today, right? All of those relative calculations were based on today. Okay. So here's the problem that comes into play is, let's say the actual date, you have a enterprise data warehouse and it contains yesterday's data. This is very common, right? There's a batch load sometime overnight to show you everything that happened up to midnight yesterday for an EDW. That relative time is based on today, but the date in your data is yesterday. And so that can cause problems. Like when you search for this month, and it's the first of the month, it's looking at March, but your data is as of February. So it doesn't compute, right? You get nothing. It's just a little problem that actually, when you start using the relative time functionality heavily, creeps up a lot. And so what IBM has done is they have given you the ability. So, and I'll kind of walk you through what you have to do this a little bit. But what they've done is they've given you the ability to have the period for your relative time based on the as of date parameter. Now, I hope that made sense. Craig, did that make sense?
It does, yeah, and I'm sure everybody on the call kind of gets it, because we've all been in that scenario where it's still pretty common to have batch ETL, right? And that usually means yesterday. So your example is right on point.
Yeah. So what this does then is it makes, and this is something each user can do on their own. They can set the as of date period. So what that means is that for the relative time, it will consider today whatever value you put in here. So you can, it's actually goes beyond just like, oh, it's intelligent enough to know. Like that would be the first step of like, oh yeah, it's, in the situation I described, like it is smart enough to know, right? It pulls the max date from the data and considers that today. But it actually goes beyond that, where you can do a relative time analysis from any point in the past. So you can say, look, I want to go back in time to January 31st, and I want that to be the basis of what is this month and this year, right? By plugging it in here. And so the steps to do this, and I pulled them up, and then of course, what did I do with them? I don't know. Here it is, right? So the steps to do this, you will see here. So it's on the accelerator catalog is where you will check this out. And what it requires that you do. Now, why didn't it like that? Did I click the wrong link? Well, what it requires that you do, so it's the first thing you see here, Gregorian calendar with dynamic as of date 11/21 or 11/17. So this works in both versions. But what you'll see here when you look at this is that the steps you need to go through to do this are basically, and there's a guide to walk you through it right here. What you need to do is you go into the environment and you need to create 2 parameters, okay? Now, what you do in the manage menu, and then you go into not config. For some reason, that's where my brain wants to go, but customization and then parameters. and you have an as of date param and then a time perspective param, right? And so you need to create this. And when you create this, you click the new button and you have to call it time perspective. The instructions are very clear about this. Like the naming is critical. It has to be called exactly what they have in there. And then in that time perspective, you create two, you create three rather custom values. Use yesterday, use last Sunday, use as of date. Okay. And I actually don't know, and this will be a question I would ask IBM. Can I put other things in here that it understands, or like these the only two that it understands? Or can I customize what it understands? I don't know the answer to that. But once you do this, you then go and in the accelerator catalog, you're going to download a zip file that contains a new Gregorian calendar. Okay. Then you're going to upload that using the content import that you do in Cognos. That will replace your existing Gregorian calendar. And once you've done those two steps, this will work where you come in here and you can choose use yesterday, use last Sunday, or use as of date in here. So you can say, I want to use as of date, and then I want to set the as of date to what it is. Or in the example I gave, I want to use yesterday, and then it will automatically use yesterday. And each individual can do this for their individual session. So this is not a global param. Everybody can control this for themselves. Now, this may seem like a small change to you, but this to me turbocharges the value of relative time in data modules. And this is actually something that I am personally, I personally pushed very hard for and had meetings with IBM about how they could get this done. And so when I saw that it shipped in this release, I want to give a special shout out to Hank Casimir, who got on the call with me a couple of times and walked through how to do this and possible solutions and all that sort of stuff. Huge win for the IBM team, I think, because it is actually a functionality that I don't think is really in other BI tools to this level of ease, where you can go ahead and say, look, I want to do relative time from any individual day in the past. I want to pick what day the relative time comes from. Very cool. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that, Craig, but I'm clearly geeked about it.
Yeah, no, and you should be. I mean, it's a very common use case, right? Especially in the world of batch ETL, where overnight processes happen, right, in order to feed your data. So yeah, I'm really glad to see that this is in there as well. And from an administrator perspective too, Ryan, you can probably go in there and set that parameter for different user groups, right? So it's not just that end users can choose which parameter, and they certainly can. But you as an administrator could also go in there and set it for a specific group of people as well.
Exactly. So then you could say, look, finance cares about data from yesterday, but for this other department, they're doing streaming into their data source, and so it's got to be today that the relative time is. And so it's just a really powerful feature that as an admin, I would really encourage you to look at. And I think as an example, oftentimes I get asked, like, why should I move on from Framework Manager? And you shouldn't always, but if this is the type of analysis you want to provide, this would be one reason that you would say, okay, maybe not everything that's in FM, but this piece, finance people typically care a lot about this sort of relative time analysis, I find. And so we'll carve out a piece of it and maybe put that into data modules, because then we can unlock this relative time capability for people in the Office of Finance, just as an example. So that's something I would check out. Okay. Now, there are a couple of other changes. I would say this covers, the major morsels in this release. There's one that I wanted to show related to, they've changed the way that descriptions are written in the, if you look at the, where is this? If you look at the, the exploration interface, they've changed, reworded the visualization details so that they have examples here. So it used to say, for example, the sum of revenue for all values of year is 4,600 and blah, blah, blah. Now it will say overall years, the sum of revenue is nearly 4.7 billion. So it's just friendlier terminology, which I think is a great step forward. What I'd really love to see is the ability to do this in dashboards, right? Give me this functionality in dashboards would be great. Now, the problem I ran into is I just couldn't get it to pop any details in our demo environment. at all. Like it would just say there are no details for every chart that I created. So I wanted to show that, but I think actually just showing this screenshot accomplishes the same thing. Like you get the difference, right? It's just worded in a friendlier way.
Yeah, it's turning computer language into more human-like language, right? And I heard Rachel Sue actually refer to it as a rephraser, which is a very good way to kind of think about it, right? If it's rephrasing this computer speak into more human-friendly terms, then it's a welcome change.
Exactly. So that's one. And then there's some odds and ends and bits and bobs that have changed here or there, but I think those are the major ones that we're going to cover today. So if anybody has any questions at this point or topics you would like to discuss, I would get them into the chat now, and we'll just give it a second to see if anybody has anything else or reactions they would like to share. While we're doing that, obviously, thank you, Craig, for joining us. Of course, the PM2 bot. Craig, it was really fun having you on here. I hope you enjoyed it. It was, I think it went well. And yeah. Any final thoughts you would say about this release or things? Let me ask you, what's your number one thing on the wish list? What's the number one thing you wish they would add to Cognos?
Explorations to be improved, right? So, I mean, oftentimes, I'm helping out with tech pre-sales now, Ryan. I didn't know if you know that, but
I heard that. Yeah.
But oftentimes, I'll go to demo a certain visualization, right, hoping that it will spark something interesting and explore. And and again, it could be the sample data. There's so many different factors there, but it's not sparking those deep insights yet, like we hope to get to at some point. So, I think the whole AI and ML infused sort of aspect to Cognos is really interesting, and you can see it moving in pretty cool directions. And once that really takes hold and we're able to get really meaningful, deep insights, just from feeding it some visualization data, that to me is kind of like the holy grail, right? So that's where I hope that's kind of the highest on my wish list. And yeah, thanks for having me today, Ryan.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, honestly, Craig, that's really high on my wish list too. Like the components are all coming in, right? I just want to see it like form like Voltron, right, into one. Into the mighty robot that it can be. Yeah. All right. So with that said, we're going to wrap it up. Again, thank you, Craig, for coming. Thank you for attending today. It was great having you here. Love to see people from all over the world coming in, as always. It is so much fun doing these. And of course, if you have not yet, go ahead and click the like button, subscribe to our channel. We do all sorts of things here, not just these live streams. It's constant, new tech tips related to Cognos, planning analytics, and Corda, lots of other tools that we're interested in as well. So stay on top of it. Look out for the training that we talked about earlier, the upcoming webinar for Cometa, which is, again, awesome tool. You are not going to want to miss it. It is a super cool tool for testing out content in Cognos that does it in a very novel way. I think you're going to find appealing. And with that said, I am Ryan Dolley. And this is Craig Colangelo, and thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care.